Hello, my name is Nora Lester Murad, and I'm happy to host this edition of the Arabic Hour. We are going to speak with two very knowledgeable, experienced, and interesting guests about October 7th. A lot has been said about October 7th, but we'd like to go deeper. We want to examine the ways in which post-October 7th is a continuation of the pre-October 7th history and events, and also examine the ways that October 7th was a rupture. It was a break in perhaps negative ways and perhaps in positive ways. We also want to explore what was significant and especially misunderstood about October 7th itself. And we know there's a lot to say about that. And while having this conversation, which will be informal, we will draw out speakers' own life experiences about these topics. I should mention before we get into the conversation that as we record this, it is the 258th day since October 7th, and since the beginning of what most of us consider a genocide against Palestinians, targeting especially, but not only, the Palestinians in Gaza. So it's a difficult conversation to have. It's real, it's raw, it's current, but it's also important. So let me introduce the guests today. We have with us Hani Murad. Hani is a Palestinian born in the Galilee. He moved to the United States 34 years ago and worked as a psychologist in the Boston Public Schools for many years. He was then recruited to the United Nations in 2004 and spent 15 years working in the Middle East as a counselor and chief of the counseling unit and then the regional ombudsman for the Middle East and North Africa for the United Nations. He holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from Fielding Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara and completed a certificate of advanced study in human development from Harvard University. His experience as a clinician and an academic stretches from the United States to the Middle East. Dr. Murad returned to work at Boston Public Schools in November 2018, and he works as a psychologist serving students and their families. He's also my husband. And also with us today, we have AL-AZRAQ. Nidal is a Palestinian refugee who was born and raised in Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem, the West Bank. He's currently working as executive director of One for Three, a US-based organization that focuses on water, food, health, and environmental work in Palestinian refugee camps in the West Bank. He's been involved for over 15 years working with young Palestinian refugees on human rights, empowerment, and political education projects. And he recently returned from one of his many trips to Palestine. And I, Nora Lester Murad, will moderate today. I am an activist, educator, and author. I most recently have been using my award-winning young adult novel, Ida in the Middle, as a lever and tool to work on education issues, particularly in the United States, and that includes the policy issues around education, the pedagogical issues, and the protection of teachers and librarians who are being falsely accused of anti-Semitism for including Palestinians in their work as educators. And so we'll start with a question first to Nidal, but as I said, it's informal, so jump in and expand and agree or contradict one another as needed. Nidal, Palestinians often get quite angry when the media or officials talk about October 7th as the instigation of something. They imply that, or say directly, that subsequent events were in reaction to the Hamas attack of October 7th. Can you explain why this is so upsetting to Palestinians?
Thank you, Nora. It's really great to be here with you and Hani in this conversation on Arabic Hour. They get angry because this has been going on since the Nakba. The Nakba has been going on since 1948 for the Palestinians, and before the Nakba, Palestine under the British mandate for 28 years. So Palestinians through all these generations have been experiencing the ongoing genocide in so many different shapes and levels of oppression on their bodies and minds in Gaza, in Palestine at all. So when Israel, and the Western world, claim that it started in October 7. It is just like denial of all the history that is before. But it is actually, when we hear that from the Western media, it confirmed to us that the settler colonial mind, when you frame the narrative, is exactly, when the Western power colonize a place, the first thing they do is to, victimize themselves and criminalize the victims, and they spread this through the world, and the white Western world catch it. So Israel really, in the beginning, spread this notion about October 7, and it was adopted by the Western world as the narrative and exactly what happened. So when Palestinians hear that over and over again, they get upset, they get angry about it, and it is justifiable.
Yeah, it is justifiable. From my point of view, of course. So you're talking about it wasn't the beginning, and referencing it as the beginning of something erases everything that happened before as if it wasn't significant. But can you just say a little bit more about why that's so important to the Israeli narrative? Why do they need to make themselves the victim? How is the story or the narrative that October 7th was the instigation and that Hamas was the instigator, how is that being deployed to justify everything that came after it?
It's just actually, I had the pleasure to, my recent visit to Palestine first. I just came back from Palestine, where I spent 2 weeks in the West Bank, especially in the Aida refugee camp, and where I had also the chance to spend a lot of time with my mom. She's an 86 years old, a survival of the Nakba, and we talked a lot about all the events from 48 up until this moment, and the fact that I was in a refugee camp that still exists and it has honorable office there, and the fact that my mom is a witness in all of that, that defeat the Israel narrative about October 7 and other narratives. For Israel to commit a large crime in a short time, they need to justify it. And they relied, in my opinion, on the Western world to really adapt their narrative. They really miscalculated that these Western powers, they have societies and they have people who revolted these narratives, rejected these narratives, and went into the street to protest in different shapes and levels, which really helped, it's not about defeating the Israeli narrative, it's exposing the truth, and making this argument really, really weak.
Absolutely. Hani, I have a question for you about your personal background, but before I do, is there anything you want to say about the whole the right to defend, Israel's right to defend itself as it relates to October 7th?
Well, Nidal have started the conversation saying that it's not really an isolated incident. And if you go back historically, Israel, the Zionist movement, has presented itself as a victim in many ways, but not only a victim, but people who are freedom-loving, democracy-loving people and institutions, as the Zionist movement or the Jewish Fund or later the State of Israel. And that entity lives in a sea of Arabs in the Middle East who really don't appreciate democracy and freedom and human rights. So for the Western audience, it's easy to relate to that. Certainly that doesn't portray the reality as it is. And certainly it does not project the truth about what happened not only in 1948, but what happened at the beginning of the Zionist movement in 1897. I guess that was the first Jewish Congress. So it's another episode basically, and I think Gideon Levy says it well when he says, "I wonder why are we able to live with ourselves with such a brutality that we are inflicting on the Palestinians." And certainly part of it is believing that they're the victims. And he gives 3 reasons, actually. That one of them is that believing that they're the victims, and not just the only victims, but the only victims who are able to justify their actions in a way that nobody else does. So they're the victims and the only victims who can do such a thing with impunity. And the other one that he mentioned was that they're the chosen people. And the third one, that you dehumanize the other party, the Arabs or Palestinians, to an extent that whatever you do with them is not really, nobody's kind of cares about, because they're not human to start with, so why would we care? And actually that was the major accomplishment of the Israeli Hasbara propaganda in October 7th. They set the stage for all Western government to line up and to support whatever Israel does in Gaza or in the West Bank without even asking why and how. So they have created the atmosphere, the scenario, the environment where you can commit heinous acts and people think, oh, well, they have to defend themselves. So just to, I don't want to go on forever, but just to mention that the first day when Netanyahu calls Biden and throws in that we have decapitated babies, we had people who were burned in the ovens, we had people who were raped, and Blinken and Biden and the rest of the Western government just bought that. And after that, whatever you do, you're justified, basically.
Right. I want to spend some time going deeper into that. Nidal, do you want to jump on that before we?
I just want to add something here, Nora and Hani, that when Israel went and described us as human animals, in the beginning of soon after October 7, and it's not only Israel, because this notion was adopted by a lot of Western governments. So basically, when they look at us as human animals, I think this comes from the colonial headset that they have, the colonial mentality they have. There's so much superiority there, so much who's worthy and not worthy to the Western world. So it is Israel committing the genocide, but with the support of this colonial mindset from the Western world that feeds into this. Luckily, I don't say luckily, but these Western powers, they have good people in their societies to really challenge this notion. But this notion is so deeply rooted in the Western world, is us versus them, who's worthy and not worthy, and who's human and non-human. And it really shows very clearly. So when Israel stood in the stage and started describing us as non-human and other things, justify the crime that they have been committed against us.
Absolutely.
Let me just add one thing that is really important, that all of these stories about the mass rape, about decapitating babies, have been debunked, actually. And there is no evidence to support that claim as we speak now. But nonetheless, they have not recounted the story, they have not apologized, and they have not said anything about, the lies that they spread. I must say that I'm not denying that October 7, the attack, the Hamas attack, have inflicted harm on civilians, certainly, and have caused, people lost their lives, they were killed during that. But the level of atrocities that were described in October 7th, they have not been supported by facts.
It's so much to talk about October 7th itself. But before we narrow in like that, I wanted to go way back out and ask you, Hani, because you have such an incredible grasp of Palestinian history from studying and learning, but also from your own life and from the stories that were passed down to you from your parents and their parents, which they got from their parents. And I wonder, when you take that very long view of history, how do you think about the current moment we're in and the significance of October 7th when you look, from the sky down on history?
Well, there's so many there are so many angles to it. There are so many layers to this question, and I think October 7th is just another episode. It's very maybe like one of the most painful ones, the most devastating ones for many people who are involved. But I think it's just another episode of a series of 100 years of events that led to where we are now. I just wanted to say that the stories from our ancestries, my parents and grandparents and the older people, is that there is such a asymmetry between what we as a Palestinian community had under the Ottoman Empire and that kind of level of preparedness for what's to come, and many times the naivete of the Palestinians by trusting kings and queens and systems that they have been working really to dispossess them and actually ethnic cleanse them. So it's October 7th is just another episode to me, and it's a brutal one. But nonetheless, it's just a continuation of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I must say that the tragedy really to me is that when Palestinians pursue peace in many different ways, being that through boycotting institutions or through civil disobedience or through demonstrations, through peaceful means and through armed struggle, nobody listens. So just few days, maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks before October 7th, Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor, was bragging how the Middle East is so calm and we need to move on to other areas like the Southeast Asia as American policy, basically. And Netanyahu himself was bragging the United Nations as the new Middle East, the Abraham Accord, the calm and serenity that engulfs the Middle East nowadays, and we're all set. And the Palestinians just left behind, actually, or not left behind, totally not considered in the equation. As a matter of fact, over the years, the Palestinian, it seems that everybody decides for them what their future should be, what their present should be, what their self-determination should look like, what kind of system they should live under, what kind of society they should live in. As we speak now, they're discussing the day after the war ends in Gaza. The Palestinians are not invited to be part of the discussion. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that unbelievable? So throughout the years, we have struggled to have identity, to have our own voice, but we also have, in many ways, faced a very, very harsh reality where we have been silenced by the colonial powers and by the puppets of the colonial powers in the Middle East.
So it sounds like you're saying that October 7th wasn't the significant turning point in Palestinian history. It was really colonialism was the significant turning point. If that's correct, I would like to hear a bit more about those personal stories? Because you talked about the naivete of the Palestinian people and relying on kings and queens. I don't think everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. So could you share what you've learned from your own ancestors and the stories that were passed down to you about the Ottoman Empire, maybe before or maybe since, so that we can understand what the situation we're in today in that historical context?
Yeah, I mean, the personal stories are so sad stories. Like, for example, my grandfather, like when you ask him, to share how come we are where we are. The answer to him that, justice on our sides. Okay, all right, just on our side, fine. But what else you have done to make sure that justice actually materializes? It's like in Arabic we say al-haq ilna. In like, you have the right. If you were kicked out your house, you have the right to your house. If somebody comes and attacks you without any justification, you have the right to ask for redemption or something. So, the naivete that I'm talking about is like we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the mechanism in place, we didn't have the system in place to stand the Zionist preparedness, to stand or to at least disrupt the program that they have planned, and they plan long term. Believe me, we don't plan long term actually, unfortunately. And also, I mean, we had very divided leadership. Certainly, diversity is good, and to have different opinions is great, but to have internal conflict that drains your resources internally and leaves little bit of anything left to face the challenge. That's also is really unfortunate. So yeah, I mean, the story is that people just were trying to survive as actually. In a general, I mean, there are two sides to it. One is that majority of Palestinians were peasants, and as my grandfather and my father, they did not have high education. But we had a vibrant society in Palestine, in Haifa, in Jaffa, in Jerusalem, in Nablus, in Gaza. There was a vibrant society, and those people who could speak and represent the Palestinian cause, they did speak. But it fell on deaf ears because the colonial powers have different plan. From 1840, Britain wanted Palestine to be a satellite for the empire. So they can control the Middle East, and they can control the Far East or Southeast, basically India and the surrounding area.
So Hani and Nidal, both of you, I'd be interested in your commenting on the Zionist ideology. Zionism, a way of thought, a belief, a whole worldview, if you will. What is so difficult for Palestinians to accept about Zionism? How does the movement for liberation need to deal with Zionism?
Hani, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
That doesn't matter. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
First. Well, I think Zionism is great for the Jewish people, but it's not great for anybody else because it's built on an exclusive ideology that basically says that people who live in that part of the world, if you are Jewish, then you have rights, you have privileges, and nobody else actually who lives in that, although you might be born that or you're citizen of the state, you're not equal under the law. The law says that self-determination only for Jewish people in Israel. So if you are, you're exclusive kind you believe in exclusive ideology, then anybody else who's other than Jewish person is going to suffer because they're not equal under the law actually, and they're not equally in a daily basis treatment, and that's not the kind of system that I would or anybody else who other than Jew would like to live under. Uh, so the problem with Zionism for us is that it just really puts two or three tier system where you have supremacy and you have other people who are less than you are, and that's not something that anybody would accept, certainly.
And I think I will say also, Hani, I agree with you, but I will also say, Zionism represents the Jewish population who believe in Zionism. There's a lot of Jewish who do not believe in Zionism also. But to me, what Zionism brings as Palestinians is when I look at Palestine, historically and recently, Jews, Muslims, Christians are deeply rooted in that land. Deeply rooted, in that land. And if I want to, as a Palestinian, envision a place that include all of that, I need to really look at it from this perspective. But when Zionism come to a place and look at me as a non-human, justify not only my oppression, justify my extinction based on their ideology, really, that is a problem to me and put me in the position of resisting. However, as a Palestinian, also when I look at Zionism and what Israel has been building in Palestine, each time I work with my community, I really need to clean myself from this structure because, living in the US and living under settler colonialism for a long time, it really affects your way of doing your work. You start adapting some of the notions that they do, And when I look at Zionism and what Israel did in this fragmentation in our society, when I look at Fatah and Hamas and BLFP and all these political fragmentations that each one relate to one group, we really, as Palestinians, need to clean ourselves from that first to work with our people and then challenge the notion of Zionism. For that land, Zionism comes from, as you said, from a settler colonial white supremacy notion that if it let go, we won't exist. And it has to be challenged not only by us as Palestinians, but also non-Palestinians.
Well, I feel like I need to jump in here, but as the only Jew here, I definitely want to say that Zionism is not good for Jews. Some Jews might think that Zionism is good for Jews, but no Jew really benefits from oppressing other people, and no Jew really benefits from a society where the oppression of other people is normalized or legalized, because that creates a society where nobody is safe, right? So while you're talking, Nidal, about the importance of listening and recognizing one another, that's all true and important, and I think it's also part of Palestinian history. The way that I've heard it is that there were Palestinians who were Muslim, Christian, and Jewish living together historically. Nobody needs to accept Zionism, though. Zionism is an ideology that is very much like white Christian nationalism. It's supremacist. It happens to put Jews at the top of the hierarchy, but and nobody needs to accept that. And I hope that Jews in the United States, around the world, including in Israel, can come to understand that a hierarchy is bad for Jews, even for Jews that are at the top of the hierarchy, because I do not, as a Jew, benefit from anyone else's oppression, period. So I am with you all in the desire to dismantle Zionism as an ideology, and I'm with you all in the desire for us all to understand and live together and to thrive together in peace. Curious for both of you, how do you think that your perspectives on history and maybe about October 7th and the current moment, how are they somehow influenced by your own different positionality? I mean, you're both in the United States now, but Hani, you are a citizen of Israel, and you were born and grew up as a citizen of Israel and came to the United States as an adult, and then went back and lived in the West Bank for many years. Nidal, you were born a refugee in a refugee camp in the West Bank. So how do you think those different Palestinian experiences influence the way you see the situation, if at all?
Well, first, growing up in Palestine, born and raised and growing up in Palestine, specifically in a refugee camp, I was born, this part of my identity of being a refugee was enforced in me. It wasn't my choice. We grow up with different type of, you grow up and you discover this something in you, and becomes part of your identity, like an artist, like a sport, like a politician, etc., etc., etc. But was your choice. You worked on it on this side of your identity. But being a refugee was forced on you. It wasn't your choice. So what do you have in this? What do you have in this case? And you have two options. You have either you accept or reject. Like anything in life, anything is being forced on you. You either accept it or reject it. Acceptance, in our case, growing up in refugee camp, it's easy to accept, but you live with the torture and pain, the internal pain of being humiliated the whole time. Rejection is hard, but you will really live with this pride of resistance, because rejection comes with resistance. So growing up in other refugee camp really shaped my identity, shaped my way, how I look at Palestine historically and recently. And growing, was being born before the first Intifada and living the first Intifada and all the events that happens after up until today reinforce this notion that Palestinians really decided to reject, the occupations, reject the colonizations of their minds and bodies and land. And this comes with a huge price for them, and they decided to go on with that. The way I see myself in this whole place, being a Palestinian and living in the U.S., it really put me in a position that has dual responsibilities. I have a responsibility in the U.S., working for Palestine from the U.S., in terms of the advocacy, in terms of the solidarity, but at the same time, as a Palestinian, I cannot be in solidarity with myself. I support other solidarity movements and groups. It really put me in a place to be in the front line with my people in Palestine. And it is a question for me when October 7th happened. And this wave of solidarity and protest, it put me in a position as a Palestinian to look at our people in Palestine on the ground and the price they are paying, and to decide from early on is to really dedicate almost 90% of my time and energy to our people in Palestine on the ground, because the human aspect, not only the political side, but the human aspect of Palestinians right now requires us as Palestinians to provide as much support and help to the Palestinians there. At the same time, we have our responsibility here in the U.S. of supporting the solidarity groups and movements that really work tirelessly to support the cause politically in Palestine.
That's so interesting. And Hani, I wonder, since Nidal is talking about rejecting and resistance, how is that different for Palestinians who are citizens of Israel and who are living inside the Green Line in Israel proper, as they call it?
Certainly, it's a different experience, although the wound and the tragedy is common, and it's one tragedy, one trauma. I think the Palestinians inside Israel after 1948 were in shock and took many years to recover from that. It's a traumatizing. It's traumatizing for people like Nidal's family who were forced out, but also traumatizing for those who stayed in, where uh, actually it's a historical fact. Palestinians inside Israel were under military rule as a community until 1966, from 1948 to 1966. So, meaning that it's a martial law, basically. And I think the experience of my grandfather and the older people in older than my generation, my dad's generation, uh, they did not want to rock the boat. Basically, they did not want to do anything because they saw the consequences of that 1948 disposition and uprooting of people. So people, uh, just hanged on. And actually, that's another form of resistance where you're doing what you can to stay where you are on your land as much as left of it. And you don't get involved in too much politics because that is dangerous arena or dangerous area to go into. Uh, People, although they're very political by nature, but there was no kind of speaking out against the occupation. Um, there was just really trying to preserve whatever left. And that goes into all kinds of treatment that we were able, or we not we were able, but we have to put up with. Surveillance, the Shin Bet or the security services could charge you with a security offense, and you'll be gone for many, many years. The the control that the state exercised on the Palestinian population inside Israel was like iron fist, basically.
Yeah.
And to add insult to injury, I grew up being called Israeli Arab, really, as if I came from Mars and disconnected totally to the Palestinian in the West Bank, Gaza, and the diaspora. So we are segmented, fragmented by the colonial power. So we don't have that continuity of society, basically. And even within the Israeli Arabs, they have fragmented us to Christians and Muslims and Bedouins and Druze. So it's like any other colonial project. You want to divide and conquer, and you want to oppress the population to an extent that their awareness of their own identity and themselves is as minimal as possibly could be. So, yeah, people
Yeah.
just wanted to survive, basically.
No,
That
but
is
also,
so well said. Nidal?
yeah, but this is a very important point, Hani, for Palestinians. This fragmentation was designed from the beginning, as you said, from Israel, is to really fragment the Palestinian society into different groups. And this terminology that we use also is colonial terminology, 48 and 67 and things like that. You have the Palestinians in 48, you have the Palestinians in Jerusalem, with a different status, the Palestinians in the West Bank, the Palestinians in Gaza, and the Palestinians in the diaspora, not the diaspora, like refugees in the Arab countries. Every group has its own challenges. You know, every group has its own challenges. And I always, as many Palestinians, looked at the struggle for Palestinians in 48 is sometimes it's like harder than the Palestinians in the West Bank to live there and to have an ongoing struggle to protect your identity and language and to live as not only a second-class citizen, quote unquote. It's a huge struggle for 48. And also to add into that, and we have to be honest with you, to live in an Arab world that discriminates against you, you know. Just because you stayed, you didn't become a refugee, but you hold the Israeli status. You know, this is also an extra struggle for you as a Palestinian in 48. But this fragmentation that was set to us have really, did not really manage to, in a large scale, I would argue, did not manage to corrupt our minds as Palestinians. You know, it's like we really click quickly. Wherever we meet as Palestinians, either in the U.S. or in the Arab world or in the West Bank or whatever you want to keep name it, and that is to me is an essence that Israel and the colonial project did not damage in us yet.
It's the whole fragmentation issue is interesting and important, but there's an aspect that you didn't touch on. I hope you will, because something does seem to be changing. I mean, Palestinians inside Israel, Palestinians who have citizenship, are speaking up, and they are, of course, being surveilled and being disciplined, jailed, losing their jobs, etc. For very small kinds of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. But that is happening. So something has changed in history. People aren't keeping quiet anymore and only looking out for just trying to stay. There seems to be something more happening. Do you have a sense about that, Hani?
I mean, there is a development. I mean, there is a progression and development of us human beings and certainly individuals in society, where the old paradigm of fragmentation did not work, because people become aware and certainly have solidarity with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and the diaspora. I mean, the most I think that I could give an example is what happened in May 2021, when Israel or there was however it started, but it's like to protect Al-Aqsa or to protect Jerusalem basically was the kind of theme. But that theme is just like to say that this incident of trying to take over Al-Aqsa is not something that of interest only to the ones who in West Bank or in Jerusalem or Gaza. It's kind of collective struggle, and the kind of solidarity that people felt and actually went to the streets. It raised a huge red flag for the Israeli government actually in 2021, and the current situation after October 7, you haven't seen many demonstrations inside Israel from the Palestinian community, and it's a martial law again. There was an incident where Hanin Zoabi with 6 people wanted to go out and have a banner or ceasefire beginning of the war, just maybe a week after October 7th. In 2 seconds, there was a security force that came and arrested all of them. They couldn't even unfold the banner to say we call for a ceasefire. And the kind of surveillance and harassment and intimidation and abuse, and people lost their jobs and are being, really targeted in many ways. That's, there is a reason, because 2021 have proved that those people inside 1948, Palestinian inside 1948, they still have that identity. They haven't lost it. And in spite of the 70 or more of an attempt to make them different or to lose the connection and the sense of belonging to the whole Palestinian society has failed, basically. So
Yeah, but also, Hadi, not historically, Palestinians as a collective in the historic Palestine, 48 or 67, they have a long history of collaborating and resisting the occupation up until today. And we have a lot of historic events and evidence that shows that. But I think to be more clear about that, since Oslo came, one of the many downsides of Oslo is not to really strengthen and pay attention to the Palestinian groups, organizations in 48. There was a bond, I am laying us of 11, for example, just quick example. Okay, we're 8 brothers and 3 sisters. Most of my brothers went to prison. When I used to go and visit my brothers and sisters in prison, the political prisoners from 48 were like filling the Israeli prisons based on their political work and resisting the occupation, alongside with the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank and Jerusalem. The last general strike that was organized, this was a historic moment that the 48 Palestinians played a major role in leading it. When you hold every single Palestinian across the map was participating in the strike, and the price was high from Israel. It threatened Israel, as you said. The price was very high for Palestinians 48. And I think right now, when I look at the demonstrations by Palestinians in Haifa, which is a huge risk, they're taking a huge risk to protest the war in Gaza. It will build something. It will force us as Palestinians to really look at this unity from a different perspective, to challenge not only Israel, to challenge the whole Western narrative and some of the Arab narrative as well.
So you've talked about, Nidal, about unity as like maybe the most important kind of resistance to the attempt to fragment Palestinians. How has the Palestinian liberation movement's effort for unity been affected by October 7th, either in positive or negative ways?
In Palestine, it really created a lot of fragmentation. Outside of Palestine, it united everybody. But this is a very important question, Nora, and point. What has happened since October 7 proved to us as Palestinians is, without ending this fragmentation, the political and social fragmentations that Oslo and Israel has created, we will not move forward. And when we look at the solidarity and the support that Palestinians are having on the world, and when the world are looking at us as Palestinians in this situation being fragmented, I don't think we will move forward. We will lose the opportunity to build on what has happened in October 7, despite the high price that the Palestinians are paying. We have so much as Palestinians in Palestine to do, to unite, to send the message to the world that, there is a different ground that you guys can build on with us toward liberation. We have to start from our house in Palestine. We have to end the political fragmentations. We have to end the corruption. We have to end the of the political hierarchy we have that the West and Israel and some of our countries built for us, and it doesn't suit us, and it will not save us. So when we do all of this work, and this is a clear message not only to the solidarity movements in the world to keep going and stand with us, it's a message to the Western power to look at us differently and listen seriously when it comes to deciding what after, not only the war in Gaza, what's after for the future of Palestine.
Can I ask you a little bit more about this unity? When you read in the newspaper, at least in the English media, about unity, they usually mean an official, formal relationship between Hamas and Fatah. That's what they're talking about when they're talking about unity, right? Couple of problems with that. There are critiques of those Palestinian leaders from the grassroots. And secondly is that women have been really quite excluded from some of those formal leadership structures and have not been happy about that. So when you're talking about unity, can you say a little bit more about what you mean? And then I want to hear what Hani thinks about unity as well, because you've got these different positionalities.
Definitely, definitely. What I mean by unity, what I mean by ending this fragmentation, it's not about Hamas and Fatah, because as Palestinians now, our political movements are phenomenal. We don't have a political structure of political movement that leads the struggle in Palestine. What leads the struggle is community work and organization work across the line. When I want to create as a community, as a society, a unity, to reunite in a different level with the Palestinians in Gaza, to reunite and support the Palestinian group in Jerusalem and in 48, to reunite and strengthen the relationship with the Palestinians in the not only in the diaspora, in the refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. This is the type of unity, because what has happened in October 7, what is happening, what is still happening right now, all this suffering, all this blood that's been shed, we cannot let it go without succeeding in uniting ourselves. Because if we don't do that, don't think the West Bank is away from this. The Israel's plan for not only Palestine and beyond Palestine is horrendous, and they are talking about it clearly and honestly in Israel as Israeli politicians. For us as Palestinians, we have to break this structure that was built for us since Oslo to narrow us in these fragmented communities, and we need to break this barrier and unite again as communities, as people in different levels. And this needs a lot of work, a lot of groundwork in Palestine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting just in the news today, and I think it will evolve in the way people are reporting and talking about it, that Israel has transferred control over the West Bank from the military to the ministries. So it's effectively annexation in a way, and we're going to see what happens to that. But I think that was enabled by the fact that everybody's looking at Gaza. So it's somehow related to the fragmentation that we look over here and something happens over there. We look over here and something happens over there. And it's really all one struggle. Hani, what are your thoughts about unity from your own life experience? What are the issues? What are the successes? What are the challenges? And how is that unique in this particular historical moment?
Well, I mean, unity is, I don't know if you can achieve unity, but at least people need to be on the same page, maybe, in terms of what objective you're trying to accomplish. What's your goal? And I think as it stands now, we are leaderless. The PA has no credibility whatsoever. And Hamas was, running Gaza, running internal affairs of Gaza under certainly still military occupation. And October 7 had changed the equation, had changed the balance of power, certainly. So I think it's an important time, an important corner in the Palestinian history to come up with basically what is it that we want as Palestinians. And if we know what we want as Palestinians, then we can build on that. There has to be a system or an initiative to get Palestinians from all corners to talk and come up with a plan and leadership and structure in place to accomplish what is that we want. And probably I would just venture to guess that majority of Palestinians want to be treated equally in peace, live in peace, and have the freedom to do what they please or live in a free society, free world, not under occupation, certainly. And if that's what we want, then let's see what we can do about it. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, this is certainly an opportunity, but nonetheless, it's an opportunity that have so many challenges, not only tangibly in terms of like actual challenges. People live in Gaza. How are you going to have people live in Gaza represented and the West Bank and inside and the diaspora and what kind of democratic system you have in place for people to elect somebody to represent these masses. In the old days of the PLO, they became the representative, but nobody elected them really. They spoke on behalf of the Palestinians. Initially, they were set up by the Arab states as the منظمة التحرير. So anyhow, so I mean it's a major challenge in this time, in this chapter of Palestinian history, really. So I think unity is important, but we need to have a program that the vast majority agree to, and elect a leadership that will invest in that program and run away with it. Running away meaning to make sure that is happening. But there are so many obstacles in terms of just the people who will wish us harm. They will not allow that to happen.
But
if talking about history.
Yeah, but we can create the space for us as Palestinians, and when I say Palestinians, not only in Palestine, to talk, but more importantly, to listen to each other and to accept the others. That is, I think, a start that we need to really talk about it, bring it, insist on it. Is the space for us Palestinians to do that, and that is, to me, is really, really needed. And we have to, as Palestinians who live outside, who have more privilege, more security, more resources, is to strengthen the bridges and the connections to our Palestinian communities in Palestine, all of Palestine. It's a crucial time to do that.
I think that is a wonderful way to wrap up what's a pretty devastating and depressing conversation in a really hopeful way, because you've talked about unity, you talked about vision, a shared vision, you talked about the importance of self-leadership, and of starting with something that actually really is in our control, which is listening, building those relationships. And so before anything else depressing happens, I think we should wind up this really interesting episode of the Arabic Hour. We could go on and on and on and talk about October 7th, but maybe it's more important for us, in the name of the tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank who have died, who are dying, who are hungry, who are being diseased and dehydrated to death, and who are being incarcerated, and all the horrible things that are happening, let that suffering not be in vain, and let us just go out and do the work, for not only for the sake of Palestinians. I'm not Palestinian, and I think it's for my sake too, because we need a world where everybody, including Palestinians, has, as you said, Hanny, peace and justice and security and dignity, rights, and just the opportunity to live and be happy and enjoy one another. That is a vision, I think, worth thinking about and pursuing. So nice talking with you both, and also I want to thank the Arabic Hour for letting me be part of this episode, an important conversation, and not the first and not the last. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.